Hi there, everybody. Salve, friends. Hello, ignorati. Okay, so contact tracing is my most awful nightmare, my most horrific nightmare come to life. I want to introduce you to a bit of history that you are probably not familiar with. It's not all that well known. And I'm not surprised, because if people have been planning the event that would lead to a tech tyranny and a surveillance state and an actual job called contact tracing for a less than a lethal infection, then we have a very serious problem. And I'm not surprised they wouldn't want to remember the horrors of Aktion T4. Action T4. And the T4 actually referred to, I think it was a district called Tiergarten in Berlin. What happened? Okay, now I want you to remember that man at the WHO is saying, look, if we find anybody who is infected, we are going to remove them from the home and put them who knows where. And certainly there are quarantine camps, allegedly, in my country where people are hustled off to, and the photos coming out of them are nothing short of horrifying conditions that will kill you. And I'm sorry, but there's simply no justification for this kind of behavior. And by the way, if you are a natural born Karen or contact tracer or snitch, please remove yourself from my site and company. And let me remind you about the Nuremberg Code. That is still law, it still applies, and your day will come. And I know there are people who are being offered jobs. Don't do it. Don't do it. It is not worth your soul, which is literally what you're handing over to evil on a plate if you take up a job in this field. Because you're equal in Nazi Germany or communist China during the Cultural Revolution, or communist Russia when they starved all those people in the Ukraine. That it is the Cheka, it is the Gestapo, it is the Stasi, as the people that history reviles and looks down on. So let's have a look at this T4. This was a law that Hitler passed, kind of, I don't think he went the direct route, where they decided to eliminate all undesirables from society. And that included people who were children with disabilities. Okay, and look at this. This is the contact tracers. Doctors and midwives had to report from August 1939 all cases of newborns with severe disabilities, and the guardian consent element soon disappeared. Well, it's gone from the West now in the contact tracing thing, isn't it? Those to be killed, in those words, were identified as all children under 3 years of age in whom any of the following serious hereditary diseases were suspected: idiocy and Down syndrome, especially when associated with blindness and deafness, microcephaly, hydrocephaly, malformations of all kinds, paralysis, spastic conditions, and a panel of medical experts assessed this, and what they did was you needed 3 to put a plus sign, which meant this child was to be killed, and then it would happen. And of course, not all parents were on board. I know there's a huge movement in the West that's so pro abortion, right to the point where the child is born, because you suddenly care deeply about life when it comes to somebody, granny, who's 86 and has pulmonary problems and congestive heart failure, but that newborn, wow, let's just throw it face down in the saline and stick a needle in the back of the head or whatever, because you don't care about life then. So this would go down with that certain type of liberal perfectly. So, yeah, the ministry used deceit when dealing with parents or guardians, particularly in Catholic areas where parents were generally uncooperative. Well, I would bloody well think so. If this were my child, I'd be almighty uncooperative to the point where I would be quite willing to use lethal force. Parents were told their children were being sent to special sections where they would receive improved treatment. Okay, now when you take a child or a person out of the home and you put them into a quarantine centre where nobody's allowed to go, and when you are doing contact tracing, I'm presuming you are looking for alarming numbers who fit the bill. Well, what could possibly go wrong? I don't know. What they did over here was, uncooperative parents, they sent them to these centres where they were kept for assessment for a few weeks and then killed by injection of toxic chemicals, typically phenol, and their deaths were recorded as, come again, respiratory illness, pneumonia. Autopsies were usually performed and brain samples were taken for medical research, and those crazy wackadoo scientists were actually moved over from Nazi Germany to America in Operation Paperclip. Look it up, I'm not going to do it for you, where they continued to thrive and teach and use these techniques, and apparently their kindred spirits next in line got the memo and are continuing on this hideous path. Now, the post-mortem examinations apparently helped ease the consciences of those involved, giving them feelings of some real medical purpose to the killings. No, it's just murder. It's just murder. And the most notorious was am Spiegelgrund, where between 1940 and 1950, 789 children were killed. I think 300,000 over Austria and Germany and Eastern European countries altogether. Killed by a lethal injection, gas poisoning, and physical abuse. Yeah, somebody go and debunk this. And then by the time World War II rolled around in September 1939, gloves were off, they just included everybody. So various borderline or limited impairments children at different ages, culminating in the killing of those designated as juvenile delinquents. And naturally, Jewish kids went in, and there was a special department set up for minor Jewish Aryan half-breeds. Isn't that lovely? And pressure was placed on the parents to send their children away. And there were people who didn't want to do it naturally, especially as they start realizing those children weren't coming back. But just have a look at this and compare it to the current climate of contact tracing. Parents were warned that they could lose all custody of their children, and if that did not suffice, the parents could be threatened with call-up or labor duty. By 1941, more than 5,000 children had been killed. Okay, so now it spreads outside of Germany, and we go to Poland. And the SS men of the Einsatzkommando, Selbstschutz, under Rudolf Tröger, with an overall command by Richard Heydrich. Okay, the genocidal Operation Tannenberg. Well, first of all, don't worry about the money, because they emptied out all the hospitals and mental asylums of the Vaterland. And in what is now Gdansk and what was then Danzig, some 7,000 Polish patients were shot, and 10,000 were killed in Gdynia. And similar measures were taken in the rest of Poland. And then they also killed hundreds of prisoners with carbon monoxide in an improvised gas chamber. And please do debunk it, because I would love to know if this wasn't true. It is that horrifying. And then we move on, and we go to Prussia, and we go to all of these countries, and now we start cleaning out. All hospitals, nursing homes, old age homes and sanatoria were required to report all patients who had been institutionalized for 5 years or more, being committed as criminally insane, who were non-Aryan, and who had been diagnosed any of the following conditions, including schizophrenia, epilepsy, Huntington's chorea, syphilis, senile dementia, paralysis, encephalitis, terminal neurological conditions generally. And what happened was, some of the doctors actually tried to, they thought perhaps something was going to happen, that their patients were going to be put into forced labor, and so they tended to overdiagnose. Well, one hopes that was the case. But the net result was that so many people fell into the net and were then euthanized. And here we have the bit about where they mark them with a plus for death and a minus for life. And yeah, 3 death verdicts condemned you. And then, of course, it just became broader and broader. And we see this with contact tracing, because first it was just wash your hands, keep your distance, be sensible. And then it was quarantine the entire world, shut it down, everything, shut it down. And now people are walking around with masks, and now suddenly, just as all of this is on the decline, actually, worldwide, suddenly there's this dire necessity for contact tracing. And let's remember that included in the list of who was undesirable and unsustainable were dissidents, anybody who didn't agree with Hitler. And so there is but one of many horrifying stories that came out of Nazi Germany, that no, we're not talking about Jews here, or Slavs, or Romanies, who were all targeted, especially for their race. We are talking about ordinary Germans who perhaps thought that this wasn't for them, and Hitler was a little cray-cray. And one little boy apparently at school blurted out that his father had said that Hitler was an asshole. A fair enough comment, and one which you are entitled to if there's something called freedom of speech going on. Now, I don't want to live in a place where there isn't freedom of speech. I'm very keen on freedom of speech. But anyway, the teacher reported the father, who was then removed by the authorities and never seen again. And that little boy had to live for the rest of his life knowing that him accidentally saying, I mean, what's the big deal about saying somebody who's an asshole, a politician's an asshole? Not everybody loves everybody. Condemned his father basically to death, torture, we don't know. We don't know what happened. So this contact tracing is deeply, deeply sinister. And in fact, this is where they trialed gassing, and they used carbon monoxide. And then, yes, look, I can't comment further. But certainly these children were killed, and these people were killed, and it's absolutely horrifying because look at those condemned patients, and doesn't it just grate when you say condemned patients, not criminals, condemned patients. And please remember that they are letting out criminals all across the world. They are letting them out of prisons to save them from COVID, while contact tracing and trying to quarantine everybody else. If that doesn't sound a little bit dodgy to you, you might want to think about it a little bit harder if you can. So condemned patients were transferred from the institutions in the Tefia charitable ambulance buses called, how innocuous is this, Community Patients Transport Service. And they were wearing white coats, so it looks all very professional and doctor-like. And then moved to centres, and of course we don't know what happens in quarantine facilities. I certainly don't know what happens to people in quarantine facilities. As I say, I know the pictures are devastating, and I'm quite sure that nobody would survive. It's the lack of hygiene, the filth, just the horror of what I've seen. But anyway, they then sent the families letters saying that it's not possible to visit relatives in these centres. Oh, how many people in the world have had to watch their elderly die alone or their child die alone in a hospital because it's not possible to visit, because we have terrible super duper infection that has a less than 1% mortality rate. Okay, so most of these patients were killed within 24 hours of arriving at the centres, and their bodies were cremated. And then they were given a death certificate and a plausible cause of death. And I have to just remember the recent video, which now eludes me, which I saw of a German professor very recently. You can look him up, Professor Puschel, that is a U with an umlaut, Puschel, in Hamburg, who is the head of forensics, autopsying people who died from COVID. And Professor Puschel says most of those people did not die from COVID. In fact, in the interview which I saw, he stated that absolutely no one that he had autopsied had died from COVID in particular. As anybody knows by now, the important factor is comorbidities and obesity. So that pushes up your likelihood of dying tremendously. And while there are some people who say that deaths are being undercounted, there are others who are saying they are being vastly overcounted. And no, they are not crazy sitting in some little third world hellhole. Many very, very serious doctors in Europe, and I think it's Professor Puschel is one of them. And I will leave the link below, and I urge you to go and look it up. So yeah, they falsified the death certificates. You don't know where your family members have been taken to. They've been removed as per WHO regulations. And believe it or not, I actually saw somebody who was downloading the app in the UK, the app which traces you, the contact tracing app. And I said to her, well, what would you do if they came and removed your child? And they said, no, that would be fine if it would be to, help, prevent the spread of disease. I was absolutely astonished. What, you would be okay with taking your child if it were to help spread the disease? But you don't know that for sure, do you? I mean, I don't know anybody who would just partner their child and give them into the hands of strangers and into the hands of the state in a completely untested, unproven system, and hope for the best that everything's going to turn out all right. But yeah, there are people who actually think this is a good idea, and that's why this is so important that we revisit this part of history. So they cremated bodies, and then they sent them back a little urn with a little letter to say, well, too bad they died. And yeah, and as I say, state dissidents it happened to anybody who was not good enough, not perfect enough. And I am seeing that we have not learned from history, and we are being condemned to repeat it. So yeah, please do not forget Aktion Te Fear. Involuntary euthanasia of people considered not good enough. Okay, that's it for now. Jezra signing out.